hitting very like low hooky shots. And the interesting thing was he didn't know where it came from, and he was hitting the ball perfectly well about a week before this. So it was kind of like an SOS almost.
Yeah. Okay, mate, so on this one here, we're going to talk about the effect of ball position on the rest of the golf swing.
Yep.
And this gentleman here on the right-hand side had a ball position which was significantly further back than he perceived it was, right?
Yeah.
And it was having a huge influence on the rest of his golf swing motion. And what we see with a lot of amateur players is if they can make as many setup adjustments and take away adjustments as necessary, we find that the rest of the golf swing can improve a lot. Now that downswing is done in like 0.25 of a second, right?
Yep.
So for the amateur golfer who's not hitting thousands and thousands of golf balls, it's a great way to improve their strike in a short amount of time. And in this instance, it's purely based around setup, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this guy was complaining about not getting the ball up in the air with his 8-iron, which I think is hitting 8 or 7-iron, hitting very like low hooky shots. And the interesting thing was he didn't know where it came from, and he was hitting the ball perfectly well about a week before this. So it was kind of like an SOS almost.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting to me is that, you know, if players don't have references, you know, for something like ball position, handle location, maybe even just, you know, how they're doing their grip, they can go down rabbit holes thinking that they need to do more of something. Now he might, for whatever reason, felt like he was hitting the ball a little bit too high before. Maybe he was, you know, maybe he wanted to see more of a draw. And he did know that like moving the ball back and maybe rotating the grip and moving the handle forward would produce that. But he also didn't know where the end point was. He didn't know when to stop doing that.
Yeah.
And as I said, you know, he came to me sort of, it was almost like, you know, I don't know what's going on. And, you know, I was hitting the ball perfectly the week before. And so what we tried to do is create like a framework of like what would be like a good middle reference point for him to hit the draw, what would maybe be too much, like if he went to the other side of the spectrum, and certainly getting him to understand where he was now, which was way, way too far on like the back end of the spectrum.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So walk us through this one here in regards to the specifics between what we see with the model over here on the left-hand side and then this gentleman.
Yeah, so we have Rocky here on the left-hand side, who's probably hitting, he's got a slightly longer club for sure. He's probably hitting a very straight ball flight, maybe a slight draw, depending on his impact location. But what I would say, he's got the ball position about one ball back from center. So the yellow line that we've drawn kind of represents what we'd call like a 0 point, or basically where the low point would not be down or up. We'll just say that's kind of like basically a
very
zero
bottom of
angle
the
attack.
arc.
Yeah. With the student that we've got here, and that's just generally like the center of the lead shoulder there. The student on the right hand side's probably got that ball about 5 balls back, and we can kind of maybe just like do it this way, where I might kind of just go, you know, all the way kind of back there, where Rocky's got it like just say it's 1 ball back there.
Okay, perfect.
So we'll take like 5 balls back. The further back on the arc, the more that he's going to be hitting down and out on the golf ball. So, you know, looking at that from down the line, that path's going way to the right, whereas Rocky's kind of like, you know, pretty neutral there, we'd say. So, you know, might be hitting slightly down and out on the golf ball, but a pretty straight ball flight. So angle of attack is going to be too steep. Path's going to be pushed way, way too far to the right. Swing direction is going to be going way too far to the right. So now, obviously, to adjust for that, you know, he's got into a really extreme closed club face position, even though we can't really see the club faces being closed there. The more that we move the ball forward, and we'll demonstrate this in a moment, with that grip position, that face is going to be looking so far left, you know, he's just not going to be able to get the ball started anywhere near on line. So
would you say that was a barrier for him? Like, for example, if he was playing around by himself and he was trying to fix his flight, he just moves the ball further forward, starts snap hooking it purely at an effect due to his grip, and he goes, oh, that's wrong, I'm going to move it further back.
100%, yeah. So it's understanding, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, it's probably like the first thing we learn when we're learning to coach is like path and face. You can't change one without the other, and we know that grip positions, face conditions, all that sort of stuff has got to do with controlling the face. And things like ball position and where we move the club in the takeaway and how we move our body, you know, starts to control like the path and the swing direction.
Huge. Okay. So what we'll do, Steve, is we'll get you to demonstrate and kind of run through exactly, first of all, where he was, and then show us the adjustments that you make, and just give us a little conversation. We'll talk about this line here as a representation for those at home who don't really know much about the low point.
So I usually use this line here inside the foot, although most people are going to put this maybe in the middle of the stance to start, just because for me it represents, let's say, the lowest point of the swing. So let's just call that like 0. So, I'll place a ball there often, as a reference for students to say, okay, this is basically where we'd play the driver. Could it be a little bit more forward or back? Yes, but that's just a good like reference point. We can start to see, one, as the ball gets further back, it's going to push the handle more forward, assuming that my hands would be, say, in a pretty neutral position over that line. Yep. And obviously, as I move the ball more forward, that would also kind of neutralize the handle. The other thing you'll notice with these golf balls is they're not straight back. I have, let's say, drawn these up on a slight arc because that's kind of what happens. The more the ball gets back, the more I'm going to track from the inside and swing out. And obviously, the more forward it is, the more that the club's going to be tracking left, or I'm going to start to kind of swing left.
Yeah, so not only does the club work in a downwards bottoming out fashion and then rising again, it also works from an in to, let's call this the 0 point here, and then back on the inside again. So from this camera here, the further back Steve has the ball, the more down he's hitting, because it's hitting earlier in the bottom or descending movement of the club down into the ground. And then also from the behind camera, the further behind that ball is, the more that path is tracking from the inside, heading out in the direction of the net. Also works the complete opposite way as well.
Correct. And I think that's about where he had it. So that's 1, 2, 3,
he's
4,
pushing
5.
The limits.
Yeah, he's back on 6.
Yeah.
And we had the TrackMan data there, which I might actually be able to send you as well. He was hitting about 8 degrees out on that ball. It was a crazy amount. So so ball was starting, either so far right. But actually, in his case, because he had the face so close and he managed to figure that part out, it was actually low lefts. He could barely get the ball in the air. So,
is this a golfer that films himself or looks for feedback?
He definitely looks for feedback for sure. Yeah, he's looking at tape. He's looking at something that he needs to kind of be working on. He's basically trolling around a little bit.
Didn't know to look at ball position?
Didn't know to look at something as simple as this. He was going for something like much more complex. Yeah.
And we find a lot of golfers do that, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to find something in the downswing rather than assessing their setup first, which a lot of the frustrations that players can have weeks on end with poor scoring can be taken care with a simple ball position adjustment sometimes.
Totally. And it's just, it's having an understanding or, a process to go through so that each time, if I like to hit a draw, I'm probably going to play the ball about 2 back. That's kind of enough. That'd be a stronger draw. Fades would tend to be played a little bit more forward, maybe with the stance line a little bit more open. But, if I always stood reasonably square and had the ball like 2 back with a handle position that basically sits on the 0, I'm going to be setting up for, a tiny like push draw every time. And it's pretty tough to get out of that if you've got a reference.
Yeah.
Or to get yourself too much.
Okay, so we built awareness around ball position. Then from there, where did you move his ball position to now?
So what we did is we took away these sort of 4 or 5 balls, and we made it known to him that he only needs to play it back 2.
So you would say that's a stock ball position. Let's say we've got a 7 iron.
Yep.
And you'd say approximately about 1 club head inside the lead foot.
Yep.
It's a comfortable reference, just forward of center.
Yep.
Relative to your stance width, however, we can see that that's 2 balls inside the base point, which Steve was discussing before about the low point of the swing. And that's assuming all things being equal, you're not moving too far off it and stuff like that.
Correct.
So,
we can obviously change that through movement, but it's just a good baseline to start with. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so we shifted this ball position. What happened next?
Really, probably the biggest change, at least for him, most significant one, was understanding club face position. Now, certainly when I started coaching early days, I'd look at the grip condition that he had and say like it's way too strong. And for all intents and purposes, it is, but it's kind of like, how do we go about making an adjustment? Now that can be a rotation of the hand, but it can simply be a rotation of the face. So the direction I went with him is when he kind of went from sort of this position and then basically moved, the club forward, the face is probably pointing, let's just call it like 10 to 12 degrees to the...
You can see it's turned down quite significantly there,
Yeah, so if he just goes and hits a shot from there, he's going to hit, a more extensive like pull hook. So what I got him to do is actually open the face first, just get him to rotate the face this way, perhaps line it up to something, like on the mat, just to have some awareness of that. Or it could even be just like the shaft down in front here if I had the shaft there.
Yeah, I use that often as a reference there.
So there's the face. And then from there, he basically took his normal grip, but with the face square, and then brought it down in front of him. So the difference with that is I didn't actually rotate his hand or change the rotation of his hand. All I did was change the rotation of the face, move the handle forward, and now he actually felt like when he set it up that the face was pointing to the right.
Yeah, I'm sure he felt the ball was going to go a mile right.
Felt it was going to go a mile right. And what I was telling him, he was getting, the dynamic loft he was applying to the ball was probably the equivalent of like a 3-iron, with a good strike. So he was getting no height in the shot. Obviously, he was getting no elevation.
Need some Cleveland launches in his back.
Yeah, so effectively his 7-iron was coming out like a 4 or a 3-iron. So what I told him, height or the face really controls two things. It controls the loft, which is the height that we want to get when we hit the ball, because it can obviously be too strong, and it also controls direction. So what we're actually helping him to do is get a higher ball flight and a straighter ball flight by changing the face condition.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's really, for the most part, what we settled in on for that first part of the lesson, and we started to get obviously some success straight away with the path and face change.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll jump in and I'll just demonstrate the effective ball position, because this is something that is very commonly overlooked with a lot of players in regards to their assessment of their own golf swings. They try and get the Golf Digest cover images of all their favorite players, and from that they tend to look at the specifics at a snapshot in time of the process of what they're doing rather than the whole picture and how that formulates from there. So this gentleman here, let's say his ball position was about there.
Probably a little bit less than that. Yeah.
That's all the way off the back.
About there.
Right, about there. So if that is right on the inside of the lead foot there, all things being equal, from this elbow crease going down, let's call that the 0 point. That stock ball position, approximately about there. This gentleman's hanging all the way back in this direction. Now, as a result of that, he started having this grip in quite a strong fashion. You can see the logo of the gloves facing more up towards the camera there. Body starts to close off. And really, when he was doing this, he was struggling to get the ball up in the air, right?
Yeah.
So he's in this position here. Handle's looking really strong. He's used to seeing that, but when he was hitting it, because it was moving, the ball struggles to get out of off the ground, right? And just dives straight down to the left. You can see there was hardly any spin on that to get the ball up in the air.
Yep.
So just with short shots starting off, we see if we move the ball a little bit further forward. Would you ever go on the error of the side of exaggeration, like moving it right on the front foot, just to give them a feeling there?
Yeah, I think for better players, I would. It's got to do a little bit with their skill level, but certainly if they're having trouble getting their upper body forward, that's a great one. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So for this one here, we'll just move this about that comfortable club head inside the lead foot, which is what we like to see as a stock reference. Taking the grip up in front. With my players, I like to try and just get them to visually see that it's perpendicular to the ground as they set their hands on it, bring that down, and that usually gives them a good reference. Like you said, having this alignment rod is also a good track for a square club face. So making the same small swing, instead of being back here where the club was chopping down and the face was shutting, we can see that gave it a lot more height and the ball flew really straight. So there you have it, a great reference for players to use for ball position, and you can simply just plot these balls out in a formation similar to what Steve did there, and it'll give you a great idea relative to where it should be at address. And then if you are struggling with any of these curvatures or getting loft on the golf ball, as we talked about from having the ball too far back here, that was the effect to the cause. Great coaching from Steve.
Awesome.